realizing how different the sports market is.
Right.
So in the Netherlands, we have by far football is the first sport. Then there's a lot of nothing. Then there's field hockey,
Right.
which we're good at. Then
Yeah.
there's a lot of nothing, and then there comes like an array of Olympic sports, but also tennis.
Sure.
And so our market is very focused on only a couple of sports. And in Australia, that was completely different. There was
Hmm.
so much. Um,
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Sporting Gold podcast. And so today I'm here with Bas. And Bas, first of all, thanks for taking the time. It's good to have you here. And how's everything going?
oh, good. It's this time of year that it's getting colder outside. So apart from that, I'm good. Thank you, and
Yeah.
thanks for inviting me.
Well, I mean, like I know you're going or have been in Sevilla, depending on when this is launched. But at least we're going to some warmer areas soon, So I'm sure that's gonna
That's
be
true.
nice.
Keeps up hope.
For sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure having you here, and obviously we're going to dive a little bit into your background, your journey in the sport industry, a little bit about the stuff that you're working on right now in fan engagement, a lot of cool stuff there, of course. And to kind of like begin, why don't you talk a little bit about how your journey in the sport industry began, a little bit about the current roles that you have now, and then we'll go a little bit from there.
Sure. So brings me back all the way to say 2007 is where I had to. At some point, you get in your life where you have to decide what am I going to study. So
Right.
for me, it was definitely something in economics because that's broad,
Yeah.
or commercial economics. But I didn't want to go into the really boring area of that. So I decided to
Right.
go for commercial sports economics,
Yeah.
which is a fascinating field. And I already liked sports, and I already had a season ticket for Ajax, so I was already hooked on the whole sports story, of course. And
Yeah.
the business side of sports is, as we all know, and the listeners also know, fascinating, very quickly changing. And this was back in 2007. So I did a program which lasted until 2012 with some internships in sports media.
Nice.
Then I went to Australia because I had a teacher that always told me, he went there once and he said in class always, guys, if you get the opportunity, go to Australia. It's the mecca of sports. And that kind of got stuck in my head. So that was indeed something that I was thinking, you know what, I'm finishing my program, what to do next. The Euro crisis was still hitting the market hard. So very limited job opportunities, as we know that the sports industry is very much following the ups and downs of macroeconomics, which we sometimes tend to forget, but we're just a product of macroeconomics. So I didn't see my chances very positive. So I thought, hey, Euro crisis, where to go to? A non-Euro country. So that was Australia. Went there, stayed there for more than a year. Worked there at the Australian Open, at the Melbourne Sports and Aquatic Centre, in Champions Trophy, field hockey. Very popular sport in the Netherlands, a few other countries, and Australia. So, but that was fascinating. Learned a lot. Really learned how to, what fan engagement is basically. That was at a conference. So that's why I like conferences like the one that we're going to, or if you're listening to this later, have been to. Which was about achieving bigger crowds. And it was interesting because I had, as a fan, I just said it as well, I had a season ticket for Ajax. I was always a bit frustrated, understanding what I'm studying, but not seeing it being applied to my experience inside the stadium. So I was literally constantly reflecting on, okay, I study about customer experience, yet I go to the stadium and it's just a cold, you get searched, you get pushed through, there's nothing going on, seats are dirty, etc. So I thought, hey, this should change. And this is something that my eyes got opened on this conference, which was indeed about where Manchester City was reviewing their fan experience. They were doing surveys, which I've never heard about, that football clubs were doing that. We're actually caring about the fans. And that's where I met the god of fan engagement, Mark Bradley, with the Fan Experience Company. That's where I met him for the first time, and that completely blew my mind. I was thinking, hey, sponsorships is not what I'm interested in within sports marketing, but this fan engagement layer is something that I do really like and am passionate about. So that's kind of where I got. That's kind of where I got into the sports / fan engagement domain.
Yeah.
Fast forward a bit, then came back from Australia, did my own consulting for 2 years full time. Then I kind of noticed that the market was not ready still, so I went back to university for 2 years, went to AZ Alkmaar, and from there everything really started rolling.
Right. No, I mean, like it's a very fascinating journey, and I mean, like you mentioned Australia, like kind of being a very big factor, and obviously learning that before you went there too. Like speaking about Australia, like what was, I guess, one of the key differentiating factors, or something that you really noticed there? There was like, okay, this just proves the point of your professor and all the insights you were looking for. Like, what were some things that stood out for you there?
Realizing how different the sports market is.
Right.
So in the Netherlands, we have by far football is the first sport. Then there's a lot of nothing. Then there's field hockey, which we're good at. Then there's a lot of nothing, and then there comes like an array of Olympic sports, but also tennis. And so our market is very focused on only a couple of sports. And in Australia, that was completely different. There was so much supply of different sports, both on as a athlete, amateur athlete, so which you could do yourself, but also from a professional side. So you could go to the tennis, you could go to footy, you could go to NRL, you could go to rugby. There was so much, so much supply, and all of them were attracting. I didn't even mention football yet. Of course, there was football. Yeah. So there was so much going on, and this really fascinated me, because here I really got to see that there is a pattern of seasonality in sports, and how competitive the market is for fan attention. So there's fans that have various sports that they like. In the Netherlands, we like or football or field hockey. It's not common to see a combination of those. In Australia, completely different. You could easily like one sport and another sport and another sport and another sport.
Right.
One of the key differences, and what that has resulted into, is that these sporting bodies really need to work to get these fans inside the stadium. So if your stadium atmosphere sucks, the stadium experience sucks, they don't come to your stadium, and it's not as if they will then support a different team inside the same sport. It's just they won't show up, and they can get their appetite from a different sporting code, different sport, basketball, whatever. So that's what really fascinated me, and that's, I think, also what shows why those countries, also like the US, are more developed, because they have more. They're competing harder for fan attention hours.
No, and it's. I was just about to say, like, that sounds extremely similar to the U.S. market.
Exactly.
In the way it operates. So yeah, that makes total sense. And obviously, you mentioned you work for like AZ Alkmaar, UEFA, and obviously some data companies as well. And talking about like some lessons you learned, from these roles that obviously that brought with you in your current role, and obviously your fan engagement consultancy, which is something that you're been working on for many years as well.
Yeah. So this started at AZ Alkmaar, where if you're in a small sized football club, because they had like 4 people on marketing, me included, there's many topics on the table that they simply do not have the time to pick up. So I was fortunate enough that a position became available, but also that there was sort of a cherry picking moment happening. Yeah. So reshuffling of responsibilities, and I picked up the fan engagement part, but the data part was also important. Now, it wasn't my first preference, but working under a CEO that is very closely connected to Billy Bean, you can understand there was a high demand for to work with data and to have a more data-driven approach. So, and that's something the club didn't have at all at that time. So I started going assessing inside of the organization. Okay, what do we want to do with data? How can we improve the current business processes? What are problems that we cannot solve because we don't have the data? Going out to the market, talking to suppliers, getting a supplier aboard, and then starting the entire process. And on the same time, parallel to that, my fan engagement, my other responsibility was fan engagement. So I was improving the stadium experience and trying to put on improve the family stand and stuff. And in the course of that job, those two parallel lines grew closer and closer together.
Right.
Because as I was learning from the CRM side more about the fans, I was also learning how I could improve that fan engagement part. For example, we were always focusing on the family section and having all the kids activities there, where from the data side, the CRM side, I could see that there were just the same amount of kids on a non-family stand. So that's where we started to link these two, understanding that, hey, if we do fan engagement activities specifically for families, we shouldn't do it before the concourse, before you enter the stadium, after you enter the stadium, but before you enter the stadium. So it would also be accessible to other kids that come to the stadium, because there are plenty. So these were kind of choices that data influenced fan engagement. And that's sort of what I found that was also lacking up until that point inside the market, because fan engagement was mostly about stadium experience and was very fluffy. So it was a lot of opinion-based presentations and opinion-based improvements inside football organizations. And of course, everyone was sharing their win stories on Twitter and LinkedIn. So it looked nice and you would start to copy from each other, but it was very much dependent also on senior buy-in. So CEO buy-in on, do you want to improve on fan engagement or not? And adding that layer of data to it, we were able to see, based on surveys, for example, hey, what is lacking in the fan experience on the grandstand versus two of the short stands? Where can we improve on? And that helped us to be the data-driven information that we needed to improve the fan experience and to measure, did it improve, and how much, and what else can we pick up? So in that job, they kind of got together, and that's where I also grew into the area of, hey, data is really, really, really helpful source of information. Next to sources of information of experience from other clubs, next to my own experience from studies. So it added a lot of information. It did not replace it. It was just an extra source.
Yeah, I think it touches upon, like, something that had been like a big discussion, I guess, in a sense, for a few years now too. It's like we have all this data, right, and like getting more and more data every time, but how do we utilize it, right? Like at the end of the day, it just comes down to like, how do you extract it, and how do you make sure that the data is obviously valuable, and that you can actually implement, whether that's new strategies or initiatives in order to support what the data is showing. And I think that's a very nice way of how you express kind of like, okay, I'm working on data side, and then also like on the fan engagement, and then you kind of like see how it all kind of like just mix and match and has to work together, and that's a very key thing that especially those that are, and it tends to be a lot of young people, listening to the podcast or part of the SportIn community that wants to be part of marketing, right? And they talk about marketing is like, I want to work with marketing, and then you just kind of neglect some key factors in it. And perhaps something to think about is like, okay, if you want to really understand marketing, also start looking at the data and start kind of working your way towards that to the top of the pyramid, if we're gonna use that reference.
Exactly. I think that marketing analytics is now one of the main analytics areas, and within marketing analytics, it's not all just SEO or SEA. It's more than that. It's also understanding who your customers are, how their churn patterns go, It's about understanding where your fans sit inside the stadium. So it goes beyond just the web analytics. Sometimes those are seen as a synonym, but I disagree. I think marketing analytics goes way beyond the web analytics, and it goes into understanding who your customers are and how they behave.
Right. So talk a little bit about the consultancy, the fan engagement consultancy. Like, what are some ways that you're working with sports organizations, and like if you could share briefly like a few cases or examples, I think that would be really great for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So I worked for a couple of organizations based on my fan engagement consulting, which really kicked off after my work at AZ, because then I really got the practical experience. Before that, it was more a personal branding thing.
Yeah.
So I had a website, published a lot of articles around it, and it was more my view on the topic.
Yeah.
After AZ, it really kicked off with a lot of projects for UEFA, for example. So we went to a couple of smaller national associations where we were doing an assessment on how can they improve on their social media analytics, or how can they improve on their email marketing based on CRM data.
Right.
So done a couple of projects for UEFA. I've done a lot of presentations and workshops for leagues. So the bigger leagues inside of Europe, I've helped with, but also clubs. So most recently I've been working for a club in Scotland to get also a CRM system installed. Fascinating club, just not having that data layer ready yet. So that was a very interesting project. But before that, I've also worked for a club in Belgium, setting up a fan strategy. Okay. So really on how can we improve our fan approach in the long term, rather than just going from game day to game day or from year to year. How can you really try to roll out, and how do you expand your database to search which areas around the key city that you have are very densely populated, but you don't have many fans in your database yet. So can you activate events there to get these people in your database? Other ones, where's your fan base highly present, plus it's a densely populated area. Could you do something to activate them there as well to make sure they remain a fan? So it's a different approach. These are fan strategy. Under this fan strategy was a lot of fan acquisition, but also fan retention as key elements.
Yeah, no, I mean, like makes total sense, and it's good to see as well, and it's interesting, I guess, for you too to kind of go to these different leagues, different clubs, like in different countries. And I guess like just to follow up on that, like what have been, I mean, like are there any how can I say similarities, and what are some I guess big differences that you've seen, like comparing, like for instance, like Belgium and Scotland, which is something you recently worked on to kind of see. Like, I know markets are different, and they tend to kind of have some differentiating factors, but at the same time, like I'm sure you find like some similarities in the gaps that are lacking.
Well, what I found is indeed there are similarities, and this is something that luckily there are more similarities in the sports domain than we tend to acknowledge or realize.
Right.
So these were two non-top teams.
Yep.
Which is interesting because they have by nature a less superior fan base. Ajax here, for example, is by far has the biggest fan base. That was always, even before their massive Champions League Champions League round a few years ago.
Yeah,
they've always been the biggest club in the Netherlands. So there, you would say it's quite easy to attract new fans. But how do you do this for the layer under there? And often they are more geographically bound. So this club is Scotland as well. It was not in Glasgow, and it was very much, you could tell that just diving into the database, you could tell that it was very much closer around where the stadium was, right? So this is, but there's still room for expansion. Instead of taking the attitude of, but we have big clubs in Glasgow. So why would fans become fans of us? I'm now getting into the Mark Bradley area, but because you offer something different.
Right.
You do not offer sportive success, so there's a different reason why fans get attracted to you as a club. It could be the community feel, which everyone's always constantly looking for to strengthen their social ties, to connect, to build new ties, and football clubs can facilitate that. So, and that's something that I really like to do when I work with clubs, to help them understand, what do your fans want? What are they searching for? Why do you come to the stadium? This is part of a standard assessment that I do with clubs.
Right.
Asking the fans, why do you come to the stadium? And the answers are very interesting often. Often they say, hey, yes, this season ticket has been passed on for generations in my family, or I just became a season ticket holder because my boyfriend has had one, and he always wanted me to bring along, and he says that it's safe now for women, those kind of things. So it's very interesting to understand better as a club, why do I do this? And even further, walking the fan walk is even better. So actually not getting into your suit and your fancy hospitality areas, but actually walking the fan walk. What does it mean to have a thick jacket inside the stadium, to walk from the city to the stadium, to in the dying cold in winters, which you in Norway know even more about than I do. So how is that? How's that experience? And what are the key elements that fans meet along their fan journey that you could maybe soften or improve? So it doesn't mean that you need to hang heaters inside your stadium, but are there areas, if it's windy inside the stadium and it's cold, feels extra cold? Can you take away the windiness from the stadium, which is something that we've been working on at AZ, for example? So I like to work with smaller clubs.
Yeah, I mean, like it's obviously very interesting, the factors that you're bringing up here, and like literally what it comes down to at the end of the day is just understanding the fan behavior, and again, like the reasoning, right, behind why they're there, and perhaps also why they're not showing
why
up.
Exactly. Why are you not fan of this big Scottish club, and you are of ours, even though you live in this in Glasgow still?
So obviously, I wanted to touch a little bit upon as well before we wrap up here is you've been obviously the last 6 years as well been guest lecturing at some top universities and business schools on fan engagement, CRM, business applied data science, and I guess just looking over the last few years, like what have been some major changes that you've seen, and I guess some challenges in the field that you have brought up in your classes?
Good question. I think that the fan engagement domain has been changing quite a bit since I've been in there. So again, 2012, it was a lot. When I just started, it was a lot about social media analytics, starting to understand who the fans are on socials and bringing all the content on those social platforms. Everything was paid for by the clubs, was given away on the social channels, because that's where the fans are. Back then the paradigm. Now we understand, hey, wait a minute, we're only feeding Facebook and YouTube and the Google monsters by giving away all the content that we paid for and not getting anything in return, because it's making their system work better. So of course they were just sitting back with a bucket of popcorn and just understanding what clubs were doing, which clubs were not. So now the paradigm has shifted. Hey, wait a minute, we need to have the fans on our platforms. They need to enter the website of the club or of the league or the association as quick as possible, because then we are in control of what happens and we understand what the fan behavior is like. And that is why you see this massive shift towards content. They jumped the bandwagon of Netflix, for example, where non-linear content was becoming far more important, but also so that these organizations were able to understand what their fans were doing. So that's why we have now, for example, FIFA Plus. Better understanding what fans consume, and FIFA then can choose a couple of versions of how to monetize this. Make it a membership based or make it advertisement based. So they're becoming more these media outlets. Now, this is standard stuff that you always hear on these conferences.
Yeah.
But if you really dive deeper into that, that's the bigger trend that I see. Plus, fan engagement has also been closer connected to sponsorships. Right. So sponsorships have turned into partnerships, which I disagree on, because partnerships are really, both parties are delivering value. We're now just relabeling them as partnerships, where still the relationship has remained the same. But you do see a change in the sports industry where the sponsors are starting to demand ROI. And this is not all sponsors, but the bigger ones, the big telcos, they really start to reevaluate sports sponsorships, and they want to understand, okay, what's inside their fan base? What are the conversion rates from that fan base towards these sponsorships? So these are two key trends that I discuss in these lectures. Yeah. There's a couple more, but fan engagement has become more data-driven, and therefore fan engagement has also branched out into different areas under sports marketing.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And there's always some trends that people need to keep an eye on, especially the upcoming leaders. And talking about like just here to wrap things up with the last question here, like if you wanted to provide like some one or two tips, for sports students out there, kind of like looking to get their foot in the door, perhaps, interested in those new trends, fan engagement, and exploring this aspect, like what kind of tips would you give them?
First tip, what I would recommend is try to stand out. So show your face on conferences, even if they are paid. See if you can bring up the budget. If not, there's often these major conferences have these special student discounts. Showing your face on conferences really helps, because I've also understood that most of the business and hiring happens at conferences, happens from personal relationships, not by waiting for websites to publish their roles online, which is happening more often now as well. But that's the first thing I would recommend. Also, that's one way to stand out. So show yourself. Another one would be to create content, have an opinion. And this is in the Netherlands often frowned upon, because it's a small market dominated by a very small group of people. So if you have a different opinion than what's now currently the popular opinion, it's being pushed away already. But having your opinion and your own views, I think is very important, because if I would have stayed within, when I started in sports marketing with the same paradigm that they had back then, I would have been one of the others. Now, I've 10-15 years ago, I took the fan engagement mindset, and the market has grown towards that. So if I would have not had a different opinion, the market would have never grown into my direction. It would have moved away from where I was. So I think this is a popular saying in the US of don't skate where the puck is now, but skate where the puck is going to be. That's, I think, what's important as well. And it needs to be your passion. So do not force yourself on a view that is not yours, simply because you think it's going to market yourself well. Do work it from an inside passion. Find what is your view, how do you feel that sports should be experienced, and push that out. Because I think that's more it helps making the journey easier, because there's a lot of unlogical decision making in sports, and there's a lot of people that are far less good as your skill set, and yet they do get the job. So if you stay true to your own nature, I think that's in life in general, but also it applies to work in sports business industry. That's going to help.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like that's great. That's great, boss. And with that, I mean, like we're about to run out of time, so I'd like to thank you, so much for taking the time, for sharing your insights, your tips, and some of the upcoming trends that obviously you guys that are listening, need to keep an eye on. And as always, make sure to like the video, subscribe as well, so you get weekly tips, from people like Bas sharing their insights and experience with you. So check that out. And of course, a good place to start sharing content and your own opinions, it is at SportIn Global. So if you haven't already, make sure to create a free user, and you can connect with like-minded people, find relevant jobs, and of course, find relevant programs and courses to help you succeed in the industry. So with that, Bas, thanks once again for taking the time, and it's been a pleasure having you part of this.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks.
All right. So I have one final thing before we wrap up. So it's kind of like a podcast tradition that we do. So I have to teach you a little bit Norwegian before we wrap up.
Okay.
That's just part of it.
Give it a go.
So with every video we do, we always finish with "Vi snakkes," which means "see you later" in Norwegian. So that's what you have to say.
Vi snakkes.
There you go. Good job.
Right.
Easy. All right. Thank you so much, Bas. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.